see my screen now. You can see a slide on the main screen that I'm sharing.
I'm going to
can everyone see that okay?
Yep.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Lovely. Thanks. If I could ask, if there's any background noise, if I could ask you just to mute your mic for this session, for this part of the session, and then later on we'll be opening up for some discussion and give you a chance just to talk to your colleagues as well. So, and I'm just going to keep an eye on the waiting because we've got more people joining us, which is good. Thanks so much for giving up an hour of your lunchtime today. We will finish. The intention here is that it'll be about a 55-minute session. So we will finish at about 1 to 2, so that you've got a 5-minute window before your 2 o'clock. And we will finish on time, so I respect your time. I know there's a lot going on for people. And of course, you'll all be excited because it's Friday afternoon and hopefully the sun's shining where you are as well, because it is here. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about mastering objection handling, and in particular, how to turn what appears on the surface to be a no from a customer into a yes. That's the idea of today. Those of you who have been on sessions with me before will know that these sessions are designed to give you some thinking space, because in the busy worlds that we all live in, thinking space can be quite rare. So this is about giving you some time to think more clearly and start to hopefully also socialize some of the ideas that we share and think for yourself, what does this mean for you in your business, with your customers, and the roles that you're working in with either customers or your team. So clear thinking space. And we're going to talk a bit about the sales process and where objection handling fits in the sales process. So we are very often, if you're in a lot of sales conversations with customers, you will be used to objections coming up, and how you handle them really does determine whether or not your success rate or your conversion rate is positive or negative. It really does impact. Objection handling is the biggest impact on that kind of close rate and success rate. So we'll talk a bit about how the customer journey and how the sales process can align. And when you get that alignment, it tends to help you when you're handling objections. We'll talk about when you should be handling objections. And then really, most importantly, we'll talk about why your customer is objecting. Why does the customer object? And when we understand why the customer objects, then we can better understand how to handle those objections. And really, I've got a couple of ideas around structure for handling those objections that hopefully you will find useful. And I'd like you to be thinking as we're going through it, how do I apply these lessons and this insight as we're going through the session? And then we'll take some discussion. We'll do a couple of breakout rooms at the end, do a discussion, bring back and take some ideas. And then at the end, if we've got time, I'll just quickly share with you something that I'm working on, or like a program that I run with my teams, and share that with you. And if it's of interest, you've got a chance to follow up with that on that with me outside of the session. And then we'll have Q&A and wrap up by 5 to the hour. So we've got a lot to get through, but we will do it. So let's start off with a question. So question for you, and if you want to use the chat for this, feel free to do that if it's easier to do the chat. I'm just going to show you where the chat is. Here's the chat. And Joe, I'll take your question, Joe. I'll follow that up with you after today. Handling objections. So when you hear an objection in a conversation with a customer, I'd love to hear, what's your first instinct? And I've got 3 options here, but it might be something else. These 3 options are from when I first started in sales, right? When you hear an objection, is your first instinct to defend yourself, defend against the objection? Is it to explain or justify, or do you kind of withdraw and back away? So I'd love to hear, what is it you do? What's your first instinct when you hear an objection? Or there might be something else that you immediately go to as well. So just share in the chat. Manjula's just said, thank you, Manjula. Manjula said, explain or justify. So you're in a conversation with a customer, you hear an objection, and then you feel like you need to explain or justify. Thanks, Manjula. Maria says, withdraw. And for some people, it can create quite a bit of tension in the conversation, and so withdrawing is quite common. Claire's got an alternative. Thank you, Claire. Claire says, listen. So listen to the objection. Just listen to the customer. That's good advice, Claire. We'll talk a bit about that today. Himesh says, follow up. So I guess follow up in the context of follow up with, what does that mean? Yeah, okay, thanks, Himesh. Joe says, likely to explain and defend. Thanks, Joe. And then Manjula says, it depends if you perceive any conflict or tension. Yes, that is very often about your perception. Yeah, thank you, Manjula. Darcy says, offer alternatives depending on the objection. Okay, thanks, Darcy. Yeah, so depending on what it is they're objecting, kind of say, well, if what you're objecting is that that's not right, then I'll offer you an alternative, either way of thinking about it, or perhaps an alternative solution or alternative option. Okay, thanks, Darcy. Some really good responses here. And then I'd love to hear, in terms of if you think about handling objections, just drop in the chat. Would you say you're confident handling objections, or would you say you weren't confident? So 1 is confident, 2 is not confident. So 1 is I'm confident handling objections, 2 is I'm not confident. I'm going to put a 1 in because I shouldn't be running this session if I put anything else. Chris, thank you. Chris has put a 1, so Chris is confident. Thanks, Chris. So are you confident for 1? Are you not so confident for 2? Claire puts a 1. Thanks, Claire. I don't love that, Darcy. Thank you. 1.5. Sometimes Darcy's confident, sometimes Darcy isn't. Good. Maria says 1. Manjula says depends on the context. Yeah. Himesh says 1. Good. So those of you who are 1s or 1.5s, I'll include you in our group, Darcy. This could be today, hopefully, think about this as kind of sharpening, as giving you some additional tools or additional things to consider as you're handling those objections, even though you are confident already. Okay, so let me just explain. I think most of you know me from either our business networks, or you will know me from the work we've done. I sometimes find it's useful just to do a quick introduction. So my background is in sales, because very often I'll get the question, how much experience have you got? And what I think that's code for why should I listen to what you've got to say, which I think is perfectly healthy. So I started in sales in 1993. That will be 30. How many years is that? Hold on, I'm trying to do the maths right. That's going to be 32 years this year. So 32 years this year. I've been in sales, key account management, sales leadership and business leadership positions. And now, of course, I work as a coach and a trainer, training clients to do the same thing. And what I found over the years, it's a lot of time in sales and leadership roles. What I found over the years is that when you kind of unpick what's really going on as performance starts to become perhaps an area of focus, then it's all about inconsistency. It's about not following a structure or not following what we think or what we know are the right things to do. And actually, very often we just have to get back to some of the fundamentals. So get, higher engagement, get the right levels of performance, start to think about the more consistent approach to what we're doing, and then results come out off the back of that. And it sounds obvious, but the obvious things are very often the things we miss. And that's a lot of the work that we do. And hopefully you'll see from today, it's about getting some of those fundamentals back in place. And there's a few things that we've done, or I've done across along the way with my team. One of those is to write this book, Inspire, Influence, Sell. If you haven't read the book, it's really worth reading, because there's lots of different elements of the sales process in there, as well as handling objections. But it's a really good deep dive into how to sell more consultatively with customers. And in that book also, I talk about the importance of understanding where is the customer in their journey around decision making. And that really does influence heavily objections and where the customer is in their objection. But let me talk through the journey and the sales process. I always like to think about where the sales funnel fits in this, where we're drawing customers through the sales funnel. And you'll notice that the funnel's upside down. It's kind of the reverse of what we normally see in sales processes. But I like to think about it that way, because it's a reminder to us that we're always drawing the customer against gravity. Customers will very often kind of either find that they're busy doing other stuff, or that priorities change, or that there's something that comes up that they weren't expecting. And so all of a sudden, we become less of a priority. And in order for us to draw the customer successfully through the decision stages they need to make, we have to follow their journey, and we have to align our sales process. And I always think about the customers. Most customers, when they start a conversation with us, they're probably unaware of what's possible. Our job is to make sure we're well prepared, that we've researched the customer, we've researched the market, we know our portfolio, we know our business, and that preparation enables us to engage a customer and grab their attention. Now, when we've got a customer's attention, the first thing we should do, as well as building rapport and connecting with them, the first thing we should do is start to share some insights with them, so those insights build our credibility and engage the customer to want to know more. And when we share the right insight and the customer leans in and they want to know more, we get them from attention to interested. And that interest stage is important because it's a trap. If we meet a customer that's interested and we start telling them about our solution or our product, what happens is they tend to very quickly tune out. And what we should do when a customer is interested is pivot and ask them about their needs. What specifically do they need from us in order for this to be the right experience or the right solution or the right product? What challenges are they facing? We ask really good questions in that needs phase. And we ask the questions because what the questions do is they help the customer to clarify what it is they want. But they also help us to understand whether or not we can help them. And when you get the needs stage right, the customer goes from interested to having some sort of desire to change. And hopefully that desire is to change what they're doing so they work with you instead. That's the idea, right? So we ask the customer questions and it moves them to a state of desire. When a customer has a desire to change, that's when we talk about a solution. So we talk about a solution that can meet that customer's needs. Now, you will all know, I'm sure, from your experience, that getting customers attentive and interested is quite straightforward. The big challenge is getting them to change. And that's why this is so important. So the desire to change has to be high within a customer before we start talking about a solution. And it's the number one mistake that I've made in my career and that I see people make is that they start talking about a solution to a customer that's only attentive or interested. And they haven't really taken the time to really help the customer unpack what it is they need from that solution so that you can tailor it in a way that's much more meaningful for the customer. And of course, if the customer doesn't really get it and you haven't done that discovery, then actually that's when you're going to surface objections. And we'll talk a bit more about that as we go through the session. But assuming everything goes to plan and we've got a customer that has a desire to change, we talk about a solution that's a really good fit for what they said they need. That's the point at which a customer naturally then thinks, well, what do I do next? What action do I need to take to make this, progress to the next stage? And that's when we have to be ready to say, well, here's what we propose. And this is a really important part of the sales process because this is the bit where it flips from customer-led to salesperson-led or professional-led. And we start to say, right, now that we understand what you need, we've agreed in principle that this will meet your needs, and you're asking about next steps. This is where the customer needs leading. Because if we don't lead them, they won't lead themselves. For them, this is important. It's a part of the experience where they have to understand, okay, what do I need to do next? And they look to you for advice and guidance. So the proposal stage is really important. And when we make a proposal and we say, this is how it works, this is our recommendation, this is the next steps and what other customers find value in, then that customer goes from wanting to take action to becoming a customer. Okay, I'll take a chance on it, I'll make a commitment and move forward. And our job at that stage, of course, is always to create some kind of immediacy and urgency at the final stage, because even when a customer says, yes, I'd like to go ahead, if we don't hold their hand to say, right, this is the next step and let's get that scheduled and booked, they can still kind of drift right back down to, oh, I'm not sure it's something I want to do, or I got busy, or there's other stuff going on. So we have to create that immediacy as part of the final stage. And long term, of course, what we want are customers that not just transact with us, we want customers who become loyal clients. They want to deal with us for more of their needs. They want to talk to us about additional opportunities with other members of their teams. And we do that through a process of feedback, review, reflection, and just making sure that we're continually evolving and improving the offering to that customer. So that's all part of the way that I see the sales journey and the customer journey matching. And if we think about where objections come up, normally objections will be raised here. So you'll ask the customer for some kind of commitment, and that's when they raise objections. And so that's where we'll talk about handling them today. However, where we should be thinking about handling them is here. We should be starting to understand what objections come up from customers and start to ask the right questions earlier on in the cycle so that we help that customer to process and overcome them through the discovery, through the needs and solution stage. And the better you get, the more you do this, the more easy that will become. But today we'll focus on, okay, where do they normally come up and how do we handle them? And then over time, we need to be thinking, how do we start to help the customer understand these earlier in the conversation so that they don't come up? And I just shared with you the the kind of linear cycle from sales alongside the customer journey. I think about sales as a cycle, and you'll see here on this slide, this is the Inspire model. So you'll see it's each letter of the word Inspire is a stage in the process. So we have rapport in the middle, we lead with insight, we ask about the customer's needs, we talk about a solution, we then make proposal, then we create immediate action, and then we reflect, review, and improve all the time. And that becomes our cycle for sales success, and it's consultative, question-led cycle. So objections often come up here. We want to move those objections to over here throughout the cycle where possible. So let's talk a bit about objections. So there's this great quote from Brian Tracy, who is, I'm sure you've heard of Brian Tracy. He's a US kind of business coach and success coach. He talks about objections as being requests for more information. So we treat objections as requests for more information. It's great advice. And when we think about our response to objections, early in my career, I used to have this emotional response to objections. So you get through a sales conversation, customer would say, I'm not sure about it, or I don't think it's right for us, or I'm not sure about that part of it. And all sorts of things used to come up in my head, right? You can see the range of emotional responses, and I'm sure you've experienced this yourself. And what I recognized was that very often, if we respond emotionally, we react emotionally to an objection with a customer, they sense it. And very often that can become the problem. So our response to the objection can cause the objection to appear bigger than it is. And so I really like, I learned this principle years ago, and I really like it. I'll kind of share this with you. We consider these two sequences. The first one is that something happens, the event happens, let's say someone raises an objection, okay? And then we react to that objection, and the reaction that we have causes an outcome, i.e. the customer thinks, well, he clearly gets this a lot. There's clearly a problem here, and it almost solidifies the objection in the customer's mind. And the switch that I learned many years ago is to kind of switch steps 3 and 2. So what that looks like in practice is that the customer raises an objection, we pause for a second, don't react. We then think about what outcome we want, and we think about what outcome the customer has told us they want, and then we respond to that rather than reacting. And that's slowing the process down, that creating a bit of composure really does make a difference to the way that we handle objections with customers. And so instead, when a customer says, I'm not sure about it, or I don't think it's right, instead of allowing that emotional response, we should take a more measured response. We should remember, right, there's an outcome here that this customer does want, and we believe we can get that outcome for them. And think about, okay, how do we get curious around that outcome and curious around what's really going on for this customer? We'll talk a bit about how we do that now. So emotional response is really important. How do we respond in the moment to a customer? Because that gives them a clue as to how we're going to handle it. And the problem is when we tend to have an emotional response to an objection, that's when we're much more likely to go into explanation or justification mode. And that's the wrong way to handle an objection. We'll talk about the right way. But the other thing I really like to think about is if we think about what's really happening when a customer raises an objection, what's really happening with the customer. If we look at this cycle, right? So this cycle for when a customer is identifying a problem and solving it, right? They identify the problem, they collect information, they identify alternatives to fixing the problem. They then weigh up the evidence. Okay, so what's most beneficial, what will work, what works in different contexts. They then choose from those alternatives, and then they implement action, okay? And then, of course, they evaluate the results, and the cycle can continue. But when we think about what's happening for the customer isn't pushing away when they raise an objection. They are working through these steps. And you might be having a conversation with them where they're collecting information. And the objection could be, I'm thinking about alternatives, and so I need to understand when I raise my objection, how does this fit with other alternatives? And at that point, they may also be thinking, hold on, I need to weigh this up versus what else is happening. Sometimes the alternatives are, what they're already doing in their business. So actually what they're doing is they're working through these steps that they need in order to go, right, yes, it is the right alternative so that I can implement action. So that objection, when they raise it, is very often them working through that decision making themselves. And our role in that decision making or guiding them is to help them to understand, right, what is the evidence? What are the alternatives? How do I make the right decision? And we should be guiding the customer through handling the objection. And really, that's our role, guide through objections with customers, not bulldozing through resistance or explaining or justifying. We can get to explanation and justification, but we do it after we've understood what's really going on with the customer for that objection. So I like to think about objections and objection handling as being really in one of three categories. So when we have objections raised by a customer, they tend to be one of three things are going on. The first thing that's going on for the customer is that there might be a misunderstanding. So I think it's one thing. I think what you've offered me is one thing, and actually it's completely another. Or I don't think there's something included, and there actually is. It's quite a common objection. It's a misunderstanding. It's probably the most straightforward to handle, but we still have to understand how to handle it. The second thing that's going on is that the customer is skeptical. And what you've explained almost sounds too good to be true. And so in that instance, the customer kind of needs convincing that this is the right thing or that it is as good as you say it will be. And then the third area of objections that are raised are what we call genuine needs objections. So the customer wants something, you can't give them that something. Okay, so they've said they might have a list of 10 things and you can do 8 of the things and not all 10. So that's a genuine needs objection. You can't do it, they want it, and how do we handle that needs objection? So let's talk a bit about those three. Before we go into those three, let's talk about fundamentals. So fundamentals of handling objections. The first fundamental is when someone raises an objection, regardless of what it is, we don't agree or disagree with them. Okay, so if we agree with them, we reinforce it. If we disagree, then we tend to create some kind of conflict in the mind of the customer. So we don't do that. We don't agree. We don't disagree. What we do is we acknowledge the objection and we understand the customer's perspective. So we're kind of empathizing. Okay. We have to find ourselves very often we talked about emotional response to objections. The other big thing is if you're really passionate about your product, you're passionate about your service or solution for that customer. Sometimes when someone raises an objection, it can, I've seen this in teams I've led, I've experienced it myself, where it triggers somebody, where because you're triggered, you then can get quite assertive in your position on the objection. And actually what we need to do is stay neutral, really stay neutral, remain objective, remind ourselves that the customer needs to make a decision on this. And sometimes, depending on where the customer is and what the objection is, the customer might need to vent or at least clarify what they're thinking. And we can help them do that with light questioning. And I'll talk about how we do that next. And then, of course, we should always be linking back. Whenever we're handling objections, we should always be linking back to the customer's needs, what they told us was important earlier in the conversation. And if we haven't done that, if we've missed that crucial step, as we said in the customer journey slide, if we've missed that crucial needs step, then objection handling becomes really difficult because we don't have that link to make between what the customer is now presenting with and what they told us was really important earlier in the conversation. So that really does, it becomes a deal breaker if we haven't got that information about the customer's needs. But let's assume that we have. So when we think about, I'm going to talk about the 3 different areas. So we're always going to empathize and clarify the objection. So we'll say, what exactly is, if they've raised an objection, what exactly is it might be a concern, or it might be what exactly is the situation that you're presenting here. And then we're going to listen to what the customer says. We're going to make sure we understand what they've said. And then I really like the idea of summarizing it back. And the summary could be as simple as, so what you're saying is, and just repeat what they've said or paraphrase what they've said. And once you've done that, there's a couple of things happening. One is that the customer feels heard and understood. When you summarize it back, you also help the customer to clarify, yes, actually, that is what I'm doing. And of course, it helps you to clarify exactly what that objection is. But also it gives you a bit of time. Gives you a bit of time just to kind of take stock, have some space, and think about how you handle it. And when in terms of the three different types of objections, the misunderstanding is quite straightforward. If somebody thinks something is one thing and it's actually another, we always own the objection. Okay, so we apologize we hadn't been clear, explain that you've caused a misunderstanding, clarify the situation, and then confirm you've resolved it with the customer. It's quite straightforward. So the customer thinks it's one thing, it's actually another. Once you clarified that, that tends to overcome the objection in a quite straightforward, it's quite a quick and easy way to handle that objection. But we always own the objection. We don't make the customer feel like, oh, you've got that all wrong. Actually, it is this. We own the objection. Sorry, I haven't been clear. Let me explain. You explain it and say, does that clarify things for you? The customer will normally say yes. So really straightforward. Then we've got skepticism. Now, skepticism, remember, is somebody saying, I'm not, it sounds too good to be true, or I'm not sure I believe you. And really what we need to do here is provide evidence. And there's lots of ways that you can provide evidence. The best way to provide evidence is to ask the customer what evidence or reassurance they need in order for them to understand that this is actually something that you can help them with. And that might be, depending on what you're selling to the customer, it might be a demonstration, it might be a client testimonial, it might be details of a similar satisfied client that you might be able to put them in contact with. But you really want to be able to say, what will it take for this customer to feel confident that they will get the result? That's really what they're asking. How do you give me confidence that you can get me this result? And sometimes for different customers, they'll need different things. So we just ask. I'm a fan of asking the question, what evidence or reassurance would you like us to provide? And they will tell you, well, and I've done this myself as a customer. I said, well, I'd like to speak to someone else you've worked with, just to make sure that you do give them the commitment, they do get the result. And then once you get that plan in place, then you're able to confirm that in principle, if you can get that connection made, then it will resolve that objection. Okay, so skepticism about evidence and reassurance. And then the final objection, and this is the hardest, is a genuine needs-based objection. So the customer wants something that perhaps isn't included in what you are offering. And when we're handling a genuine objection, we have to be honest about the mismatch. Okay, so if you can't do something, we can't say we can do something that's not possible or isn't included within the functionality of what you're offering. So what we do in that instance is that we have a conversation with the client and we highlight the needs that we can meet. And then we ask the clients to prioritize between those needs. So we might say, you said earlier that it's really important that we get you the right timing, or it's really important that we get the right functionality, or it's really important that we're able to provide you with the right support after implementation. Whatever that list is, you said that all of these were important as well. When it comes to this objection or this point that you've raised, where does that fit with all of these other points that you said were important earlier? And when you get the customer to prioritize that, it's really interesting what happens, because they will start to rank the different things themselves, and they'll say, no, you're right, that is important. Yes, you're right, we do need to make sure that's a consideration. Yes, we do. And when they start to put it into context themselves, very often the objection they're raising actually comes down at position 4 or 5. And they then are the ones that say, I think we can live with it. If you can't do that, I think we could live with it. And they'll come up with their own suggestion, or perhaps we can do this internally, or we can do something ourselves. And actually, it's a really effective way to do it. So you are coaching the customer to handle their own objection. And then what we might go on to do, if actually what they say is, well, this is a deal breaker, this is the number one thing, then we might say to the customer, what could we do to minimize this or overcome this? If we can't make this happen, what can we do with all of the other elements of what we offer to offset this or overcome this? And very often the customer, if they'll tell you what you need to do, or if they can't, if it's a deal breaker, sometimes these things happen. Sometimes we can't meet the needs of every customer. But if you have followed this structure and this process, you will know that you're in a position where you give yourself the very best chance of overcoming that objection. So they're the three kind of key objections and how to handle them. And then we've got this, sometimes objections come up at different parts of the sales process. So there are ways to handle different types of objections. So we've got this objection to decision journey. When you get initial resistance, like, no, I'm not interested, really what's happening here is the customer is asking themselves, do I trust you enough to keep listening? And what we need at that point is, we need rapport, we need really strong relevance, and we need a connection that provides safety, psychological safety for the client and for you yourself. And that's really important in that early initial resistance. When we get a bit further down the line, you get doubt or risk. They call it doubt or risk perception. It might be around, they might say something like, it's too expensive, we don't have the budget. And really what they're saying to you beyond that kind of surface level objection is the value of this or the cost of this worth the risk? And so is the value worth the cost or the risk? And really what they need to hear is they need to understand, how have you built value through the sales conversation? Have you understood really what that client is looking for? Have you helped them to perhaps reframe some of their thinking and start to give them evidence that they could sell internally? And sometimes this is somebody not feeling confident to be able to present this back into their own organization. Then we've got delay or deferral, let me think about it, or maybe later. And what really the customer is saying here is this a priority now? And this really does link back to the customer's need and understanding, how urgent is this for them? How big is the problem? And can you help the customer see this as a bigger problem than perhaps they initially see it as? And start to think about timeline. So if they say maybe later, or let me think about it, we might need to ask about timeline. So when might be the right time for this to happen? And then four is clarification needed. So, they need to speak to someone, or what if it doesn't work? And really the customer's saying here, do I have enough information to move forward with confidence? And what they need here is clarity. They need some reassurance. They might even need a lower risk next step, lower risk, lower entry next step, so that you kind of start to manage or share some of that risk with the customer in this situation. And then finally, get customers that say, okay, I'm interested, but they're not saying yes. They say, okay, you got me interested. And they're really kind of at this stage, they're asking themselves, am I emotionally and logically ready to say yes? I'm saying I'm interested, but I'm not saying yes. And in this stage, they need empowerment. They need really simple path to action, and they need some kind of emotional commitment themselves to really being able to move this to a decision. And recognizing, of course, objections really aren't, they're not obstacles. They're insight into where the customer is in their thinking at this point in time. And our job is to try and move them through that decision-making journey. And there's a couple of other slides I just want to share with you, and then we'll pause and give you a chance to kind of think about it. As well as objections, sometimes we'll get questions. I always think about handling objections and questions, simple principles: actively listen, create a pause, so that you give yourself some thinking space and the customer sees that you've taken the question or the objection seriously. Summarize it back to the customer. So whether that's a question or an objection, then we thank and acknowledge the question or objection. So, thanks for the question, or thanks for raising that. It's really important. It's important because you need to know that you're getting, you're making the right decision, or that you get the right understanding. So acknowledging the customer's a question or objection can be really powerful as well, because you're kind of validating them in the process. And then, of course, we answer the objection or the question. So I always think about that if I'm doing presentations or talks, or if I'm in a customer conversation, I'm listening to an objection or a question, pause, I summarize it back to make sure I've understood it. I say thanks for the question, then I answer the question. And even though that seems like it's the long way round, it has this effect of really getting people on board as you handle it. So structure for that's really important. And then final thing I want to touch on in terms of how we answer questions or objections. You may have heard of this principle before, and it's a good reminder if you haven't heard about it, it's really useful. So this is quite a well-established way to answer objections. It's called feel, felt, found as a principle. And the way it works is that you say, I completely understand how you feel about that after you've summarized the objection. A few of our customers felt the same. You might expand on that. It's a common reservation, or it's a common misconception, or whatever is the right phrase for your business. And then the final thing is, however, when they work with us, what they found was, and so you've got this really nice way of transitioning between where the customer is in their thinking and validating them through to having a way to handle it and share with the customer actually what the result could be if they get this right. Okay, so I've shared quite a bit there. Hopefully that's useful, and I hope you've got a few kind of insights in there that you can start to integrate into your approach. I'd love to hear. I'm going to open up a few breakout rooms and give you a few minutes just to meet each other and talk about what you've learned from the session. I've got a couple of questions that might be useful as prompts, but don't feel you have to answer these questions, but I thought these might be useful. So first question is, how does this shift your view of objections in this session today from something that you feel you have to handle, maybe more to something you can guide customers through rather than feel like you've got to handle them? And then next question, what's one change you'll make in your next customer conversation based on this session? Okay, for those of you who can't join breakouts, no problem. If you've got to go, feel free to run. But let me open up a few breakout rooms to give you the chance just to talk with your peers and just kind of process this a bit more around today's session. So how does it shift your view of objections? What's one change you think you're going to make as a result? So I've opened up 3 rooms. Enjoy your conversations. We'll have about, I'll give you between 5 and 10 minutes, probably about 7 minutes on this. We'll come back just after 1:45 the hour. So enjoy your conversations, and I will see you back here in just under 10 minutes. You should just be able to click the link and you will be in your breakout room. See you shortly. Resume our slides. So I'd love to hear what happened in your breakout rooms. I appreciate one of your breakout rooms might have been a bit quiet because I don't think you had the opportunity to talk. But let's go room by room and see what we've got. So room 1 was Chris, Claire, Darcy, and JP. I'd love to hear some feedback from your group. Would someone be happy to share some kind of thoughts?
I'll kick off if that's okay.
Thanks, Chris.
I think our conversation in the main was around where the objections are coming in the sales process. You have the very, very early ones getting that initial interest, that initial desire. Then you have the later ones where you're trying to close. It could be around about the price, what the product or service actually delivers as well. So how they're very different and where they come and trying to overcome them was a big part of the conversation, as well as selling a concept or an idea to telemarketer, having an appointment versus an actual product or service sale, and how those objections differ as well. So kind of a discussion and debate around that.
Yeah. So whether you're selling next stage or whether you're selling the product or actually you're selling engagement in the first place, lots of different areas where objections can raise. Yeah. And was there consistency around maybe things that needed to change, Chris? Was there like a one thing that people said, this is what I'm taking away or what I'm going to change as a result of?
I think JP had a real takeaway from the session, so I'll let JP fill you in.
Yeah, good. JP.
Thanks. Yeah. No, I was just saying that basically, so our biggest objection is mostly price, and so that's more towards the end proposal side. And I think the biggest take that I got from this was not to agree always with that. We know a product's expensive, but I tend to always agree with that and then give a perception. So like, it might be expensive, but it's the same as somebody's salary, a monthly salary, and you're getting more value from us. So I'll rethink that strategy and not agree or disagree.
Yeah.
But so I that was quite good.
Yeah. Nice. Thanks, JP. Thanks. And thanks, Chris. Good. Any more from your group? Anyone else in your group got a takeaway they'd like to share?
The being shy, feel, felt, found resonated really well with Claire.
Yeah, good. Thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thank you, Claire. Yeah, it is. When I first learned that and started to use it, it's surprising how it helps you, because sometimes structure gives you just a bit more confidence in the moment. So you don't feel like you're having to think on your feet. The feel, felt, found gives you structure when you're responding to an objection with a client, and that sometimes can be enough just to give you the confidence to handle it a bit more effectively. So yeah, thanks Chris, thanks Claire. Okay, then we had second room, which was we had Alex, Dorcas, Manjula, and Maria. How did you get on in your conversation?
Shall I speak for us, Maria?
Thanks, Manjula. Yeah.
Okay. So Maria's situation was very much, well, I think when the product or service is to do with your teeth, that's a big deal. Teeth and hair are really important personal things, aren't they?
Yeah.
That, you know, you need to get done, but you know, sometimes the price point is a limiting factor. And Maria was explaining how once you've gained the trust, then the desire, converting that desire into a proposal doesn't seem to be a problem. Correct me if I'm wrong, Maria. You're saying clients, established clients will travel far and wide to come to see her.
Yeah.
However, new customers in her practice, not so easy to convert.
Yeah.
And so then I was talking about how my service is so different in that I'm bypassing that needing to create that attention and interest, because most of my customers come from referral. And so converting them is not the major problem, but sometimes that the price point is still an issue. So I have interim type level services I can offer where it's not one-to-one, but they can do a recorded course or something like that. And whether that principle could apply to her scenario in terms of having an interim solution that's not the full-blown, I don't know, whatever expensive, you know, root canal or whatever, compared with, you know, is there something interim that she could offer that would mean that she could develop the trust at that stage instead, and then they're likely to come back a year or two later.
Yeah, you're kind of thinking about the value ladder and the stages of value that the client needs to have. Yeah, but there's also there's that principle around, they call it it's like the trust and relationship scale, where on one hand you've got someone who appears to be a stranger. I don't know enough about you to trust you. And then on the other hand, you've got the trusted advisor, where actually anything you recommend, I will take and sign up to. And actually, if you look at the stages, there's like gates, if you like, of getting from stranger to trusted advisor. Sometimes if someone's coming into your, whether it's your business, your practice, and they are at that kind of first step from stranger, I don't really know you, I don't really know how credible you are, and then I get this recommendation that it's something that's really high ticket, then you get a bit of resistance and skepticism from the client. And that does take, sometimes it's actually just a journey that the customer needs to go on in order to build the trust and the relationship. You can't do it first time, and you have to appreciate that there are stages of adoption that the customer needs to go through. Yeah.
A bit like the networking escalator, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Like no trust, is it that way?
Yeah. Yeah. Like no like trust. Yeah.
No like trust.
Yeah. And there's probably a few more stages, especially when it's high ticket.
Yeah.
People that have got to make significant investments to work with you, it does take a bit more. But yeah, interesting. And that kind of blends with, a bit like we said at the start, objections are part of the sales process. If you don't get the sales process right, the objection can be really difficult to handle. So you got to understand, sometimes you're looking at wider than just that single conversation in the moment. What's actually being surfaced or presented is broader than that. You have to look at, what's your process for gaining that trust and the relationship with clients. Yeah, thanks, Manjula. Thank you, Maria. And then Joe, you've got your hand up. Did you know you got your hand up?
Hello. Yes, I did. Yes.
Hello, Joe.
Our breakout room is probably the one you were talking about, where everybody was muted and on black screens, cameras off. But sorry, I agree with.
Did you get a conversation or not? No.
Well, I can talk to myself for hours, Justin, so it's not a problem. But I agree with what they were saying. It's really interesting. We've got patients that travel internationally to come and visit us. Once they've got that trust relationship, I think that's quite distinctive about dentistry, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But going back earlier on, about what's your instant reaction, you know, when you get that kind of
Objection.
moment. And I think what I've learned from your courses over the years, Justine, is actually a lot of it comes back to mindset.
Mm,
And
yeah.
particularly for me, with a history being a dental nurse, in the hierarchy of the practice, it's almost like, you know, if you feel like the smaller person, or like when you were talking on your course about how comfortable are you talking about money, all of this is going to create how you respond to that objection, isn't it? And you know,
Yeah.
like you said, that's all I wanted to say was, I think you know,
Yeah.
how you're feeling, you know, where you think you are in the relationship, actually, you know, for me personally, has had a big, you know, impact on that.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. You're absolutely right, and it kind of links to that emotional response. The better we manage ourselves in those situations, the more confidence we give the customer. Because when the customer raises an objection, or if you're in a conversation and they sense, I don't know, if they sense you're emotionally responding, or you're panicked, or you're fearful, you know, we leak so much through body language that emotional self-control is really important. Right? Retaining confidence gives the customer confidence. And sometimes we don't even realize it's happening. So you're absolutely right. So the first step is learn how to manage yourself really effectively, because you'll give yourself and the customer confidence. Yeah, great. It's a great way to finish today's session. So we are at 3 minutes to the hour. Appreciate you've all probably got 2 o'clock. So I won't do my final slides, but I will say thanks so much for joining today's session. If there is anything you want as a follow-up from today, I'll send you the slides and the recording on email. If you want to get back in touch with me about anything we've covered today or anything else, then do feel free to pick that up with me after today's call. But enjoy the rest of your Friday afternoon. Have a wonderful weekend. I hope the sun shines where you are, and I hope to see you again on a future session. So I will hang around now for a couple of minutes if anybody wants to chat or ask any questions. Otherwise, have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Can I just say, I hope to see as many of you as possible at the dentistry show next week if you're going. That would be great.
Thank you,
If
Joe.
anybody wants to meet up on LinkedIn and let me know when you're going, that would be cool.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Joe.
Say hello for real. Thanks, everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Thanks. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Have a great weekend. See you soon.